Ask the Podcast Coach for August 18th, 2018. That's not the right music.
Oops.
Wait a minute. It says, oh, you know what it is?
Oh, no. Bummer. Well, we can do it again.
Hold on. Hold on. Where is... Oh, it's at the very top.
There we go. All right. New things. All right, let's try it again.
All right. Hey, I'm going to hit the Q button. In theory, that just made a marker. Ask the Podcast Coach for August 18th, 2018.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There we go. That fun-filled music, it means it's Saturday morning. And if you've got podcast questions, we'll get them answered right here live. The website, askthepodcastcoach.com/live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. Back home. It's nice to be home. Joining me right over there from his home over in Omaha, Nebraska. The one, the only, Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. We say the beautiful Bellevue, Nebraska, just south of Omaha. So nobody knows Bellevue, but nobody knows Bellevue. But good Saturday morning to you. It's good to be back. Good to have you back. And thanks for letting me kind of host last week. It was fun to, control. We ended up, I think you used the mix pre-6. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
And you recorded it on your end, and I went back and listened to the audio. It sounded great. So
it's interesting now. Video. Yeah, when I drag the I forget what they call it. It's a special WAV file, but when I drag it in, it gives me the stereo mix. It gives me my track and your track. So now if I want to, I can EQ you or EQ me or whatever. And that is actually on one hand, it's a cool thing. For the record, it's kind of a pain in the butt because now you got to make sure everybody's the same volume. And it's like, the good news is more control. The bad news is more control. And plus with Hindenburg, which is what I use, when you bring in a file, it automatically levels it in theory. And when you're dragging in 3 hour-long files, that takes a bit. It's like, oh, let me go get a cup of coffee while that does that for a minute and a half. And it doesn't take a super long time, but it seems like forever when you're sitting there watching a progress bar. That's going to be one of my things. When I get to heaven, I'm going to be like, I'm just curious, like how much of my life was spent waiting a progress bar.
Yeah. Waiting for computer things to finish. I've tried to optimize, and you probably have too. I've tried to optimize my workflow so that I'm doing things while I'm waiting for other things. I'm writing show notes or, that's a thing, Dave. I know people complain about show notes all the time. And one of the things I've learned over the last, 4 or 5 months is I've been pre-writing my show notes, so when I think about shows like Emily's show where she reads it, or Mike Murphy, he reads his, their show notes are done for them, which is just brilliant. And so there's a whole bunch more motivation to write show notes before your show than there are after it. You're just in a different frame of mind. And so now I'm getting way better show notes than I used to because I'm pre-writing them. And it kind of keeps you on track, and it keeps you motivated throughout the show. So that, for me, that has been a big change into my show notes, is getting them written before the show as opposed to afterwards. I get them done more that way.
I started doing that just because I used to be able to record everything. I would have my bullet points. I would record it. And then as I was typing the show notes, listening back to the show, I would inevitably come up with something that I should have said. And I was like, and after about the third time I did that, I'm like, I'm going to start writing out the show notes first. And I actually write out I write a blog post. My show notes is basically a blog post.
And even better if you can get a blog post out of it. It's a real one. Yeah.
And then I take that and get my bullet points and then use that for the show. But I was forever going, oh, you know what? I should have said this here. I should have said that there. And I'm sitting here today. It dawned on me, I need to go back and listen. I bet it's this way. I left 10 seconds of blank space when we thanked our awesome supporters. And I'm not 100.
You got it.
I'm not 100% positive, because what happened was, remember how I forgot to thank Josh Liston? And I remember I cut that out, and then I put 10 seconds in for me to go, Josh Liston on the Bubble Podcast. And I'm like, I don't remember doing that. And I was doing so much stuff. Nobody's told me.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently listening to it. I wonder how far I've gotten. That's Ask the Podcast Coach. I listened to like Thursday, Friday, right before. So I listened to last week's yesterday. Now, I was home yesterday. I didn't commute, so I didn't have as much time to listen. The other thing I was going to say on that with show notes, when you're running all these processes, you just leave your show notes up and keep editing them, like keep adding to them, keep doing, you've got during that time. And, my time's probably a little bit longer because I render video feeds. So I actually take the YouTube video and I use Handbrake and I crunch it down to a large file and a smaller video file that I put out I have video RSS feeds that folks consume. And those take a while. I mean, I'm waiting on those things to kind of crunch through, and the large one probably takes 20 minutes to crunch through, an hour and 15 or so.
Yeah.
20, 25 minutes, right? It takes a while for it to upload to YouTube. It takes a while for it to upload to Auphonic. It takes a while, right? So I'm starting to get in the habit of, those are the times I go back. If I can't do anything else, I'm going back to the show notes and just cleaning them up, just adding, moving, adding, you can never add enough to them. So it's a good, if you're in that situation, good thing to do. Just have your show notes ready for you and be working on them while you're waiting for things to happen.
Yeah. Are we ready for a power rant?
Oh yeah, can't wait for this. Go.
It's time for a power rant.
I'm actually going to play a clip from a show, and for the record, this is probably not legal. I don't know that I know I don't have their permission because I just decided to do this morning.
It's commentary.
Yeah, it's commentary. And it's from a show called The Word from Mouth. And I've met Mark. Mark's a nice guy. I'm not sure I'm a fan of the show because a lot of times he just spews opinion but doesn't give like why. I always try to give the why. Like, if I don't like Anchor, here's why. If I don't like this, here's why. And then you can tell me if I'm full of it or not. But anyway, this came on last night. They also said that, here, let's just play the first clip.
The other issue with podcasts is that there's no...
Stop that. This is a VC. This is somebody who spends millions of dollars. Just here's $1 million. Go, blah, blah, blah. And so she's talking. He's talking to her about the podcast industry.
The other issue with podcasts is that there's no clear way or great way right now to search for content, right? So I think the voice search aspect, I think that's, one reason why that was VC backable investment.
Yeah.
Because you're
that makes sense. And then that actually makes it a differentiator
right
with radio.
Right.
Yeah.
Alexa's
that makes a lot of sense. Discovery is still that uncracked component here.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm really into knitting and I live in Iowa, I have no way of finding the knitting show that I really want.
Right.
Yeah.
And
did we lose Google somewhere? Did Google just stop working?
Like, I guess if I'm in Iowa, I'm never going to be able to find an Iowa knitting podcast. And I was like, and here's what literally, again, I think Mark's a nice guy, but I was like, dude, I'm kind of losing a little bit of, like, you lost a little credibility there because to sit there and I know she's so-and-so and so-and-so, and she's a VC person, but you got to go, well, actually you could just Google, like, okay, Jim, let's do it. You Google knitting podcast. I'm going to fire up, as much as I hate this software, I'm going to fire up Apple Podcasts. And I think we're going to prove, remember how I said I love the why? Okay, iTunes is slowly loading. My audio is probably okay. And I'm going to type in, I'm in the store, and I'm just going to type in the word knitting and press enter. KNITTING.
Yeah.
And it's searching stuff Mom never told you. How to be a grandma knitting. I like that one. How about knitting pipeline? Never not knitting. Shiny Bees, the knitting comedy show. 2 U's. Isn't that cute? EWES. Adventures. A podcast. If I put my mouse over this, I'm assuming it's. What'd you find? Did you find?
So I maybe even one better. I found a bunch of knitting podcasts every knitter should listen to from Craftsy. So there's a list there. The 10 best knitting podcasts from allknittingfree.com or allfreenknitting.com. Knitting podcasts, 9 popular shows you don't want to miss. Top 10 podcasts for knitting. I mean,
if only there was a way we could find podcasts.
It's like
stab yourself in the face and die.
That's all I'm saying.
We've lost our minds, Dave, on this. Like, all of a sudden we have to have an app for discovery. Hey, Google had this down, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And then with their kind of commitment, now they have some work to do, but with their kind of commitment to podcasting, 3 podcasts showed up in my search. right? So I could go right to, now they're all YouTube videos, right? But they're still podcasts, and I bet they have an audio feed that I could listen to. So it drives me crazy.
So I don't blame the VC person. I'm like, no, we need to have people stand up and go, actually, if you just go to Apple Podcasts and search knitting, I bet you could find a knitting podcast. Even though you live in Iowa, I was just like, what are you doing? And then previously said VC person said, well, what we need is our ways to measure podcasts. And again, Mark said nothing, zero. And I'm like, wait, somebody needs to go, well, actually you get more, statistics from podcasting than you do from magazines and radio combined, probably. And I was just like,
and it's getting better, right? I mean, we're just starting. We're just starting to make it work right, and it's getting better. So, yikes, yeah.
So that was
it's a little, it's a good power rant. I usually don't agree with your rants, but I totally agree with you on this one.
When he said if the woman in Iowa can't find a knitting podcast, I was like, wow. Dude, you're making yourself look not exactly
I want to say, did her computer break, or like this isn't like 1993, for God's sakes.
Let me see if they're asking for everybody wants to go now. This is the bad news. I'm giving this guy exposure. I want to say Reiko, the word from mouth. And what gets me is in fact, I even have their description from their website. This is the other one that I was like, to the US. Here we go. Word from mouth. This is one thing I hate about Trello. If you don't hit save, here's their mouthpodcast.com is their website. And if you go to about, it says weekly insights on the state of podcasting and audio from thought leaders such as Rob Sanchez, who is the CEO of Mouth Media Network. Crucial news highlights from Pod News, which I kind of want to go, James Cridlin, you need to step away from these guys because they're going to ruin your brand. And podcasters, insiders, and leaders from the podcast industry. And this is the line that gets me: for everyone who is taking podcasting seriously. And then you go there and they have one button to subscribe on iTunes. Mark Raco, R-A-C-O, he's been on the podcast review show a couple of times. He's got radio, he's got TV experience, he knows media, but I was just like, oh, come on now, stand up and
that drives me crazy too. When we use words like real, or for people who, well, the real way to do this, or, and you're like, come on. We're better than this. We're better than this.
I got one other clip. Now, this one's kind of long. I really debated. It is not going to show me how long it is. I want to say this is close to 2 minutes, and it's from somebody who I've really been disagreeing with lately. And that is our good buddy, Gary V. And I want to thank Dr. Ryan Gray from the whole Doctor Network. I should have probably written that down, but
you got a lot on your mind.
Yeah. But this is an interesting clip, and this is one where I actually agree with him. He's talking to Kyle Busch, who's a NASCAR guy, and apparently Kyle's going to launch a podcast.
But we got one great shot of launching this. We're going to do it in SEMA 2018 this year.
You're already over. Let me give you a very good piece of advice. Do not put that fake pressure on yourself that you have one chance to launch this thing. It's the biggest mistake that people make with media properties and businesses. They think there's this, especially if you haven't done it before, or it's natural human nature, right? You want to come out the gate. It's probably no different than starting Daytona off on the right foot. Like everything, like when
you want to win right away, you ain't going to win right away. You got to build into it.
I really don't want, here's why I'm most worried about it, my friend. I don't want you to do behaviors that so overvalue the short term in something where you're playing for life. You're trying to build something that you hope pays for your livelihood around a passion you have, I assume, right? The idea is you'd love for this to be, whether it's a podcast or a media property, this is what you do for the rest of your life, making the kind of money that lets you live the lifestyle you want. Is that correct?
It's one of a few components. I am definitely on your, willing to eat fish as long as it takes mode.
Good. So then I would say everything sounds great. Don't over worry about the launch, because it may be episode 96 that really turns the tide. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And
Absolutely.
the luxury you have is that you don't work for a television network. Like ESPN didn't buy the rights to you, and then the ratings were bad after 3 and they cancel it. You have full control of content and distribution. You don't have to worry about popping because you're not at the mercy of Nielsen ratings and advertisers and all the other dynamics that traditional media had to worry about. If you had a radio show, 20 years ago around this subject matter, if your first 6 weeks didn't go well, you're finished. I mean, here in New York, Mike Francesa was the legendary sports guy. He left, retired. They put in a show. It lasted like 5 weeks, and Francesa was back because the ratings weren't there. You don't have that. So I think before you even ask the question to make the launch pop, make sure that you realize you don't need the launch to pop. It'd be nice for it to be great, but don't over worry about that.
So I thought that was a good clip.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. Gary's a little too intense for me.
He is a guy that just is always talking like this, and he's got it. And I was laughing because his audio is okay. And actually, it sounds better than it used to. Yeah, a lot of times I think he had like the Blue Yeti for a while going on because it was really roomy. But it was like, I think it's because he's probably moving around and talking like this that I'm like, so. But I love the fact, anyone have that link for the first podcast? Yeah, it's mouthpodcast.com is where you can find that. And then he's interviewing some VZ person. But yeah, I thought, as much as I hate Gary for promoting Anchor all the time, I was like, all right, that's good. And I've never thought about that. With TV, you have to come out of the gate. Otherwise, you're the lovely, what was the show? I can't even remember the name of the show now, about the guy from Gimlet. Does
anyone know what a podcast is?
Oh,
it's radio on the internet. My mom listens to them, and they're totally boring.
Alex Incorporated. If you don't come out of the gate swinging, you don't get a chance. You're done. And he's like, "Hey, look, you're not on TV." And I was like, "That's a really good point." Because I see, and I agree with him. I think people make bad decisions trying to hit a deadline.
Yeah, that's true.
That I'm like, wait, so the world's waited 14 years for your podcast, but you're going to do all this stuff now because they can't wait one more week. I'm like, come on now.
I go against the grain a little bit on Gary Vee. I'm not a big fan of him. I think he says too many things that are obvious, and he's too much of a hustle guy. And it's not all about hustle, and it's just not all about, I know I go against the grain on this, and I know there's a lot of folks in the chat room who are just, I love Gary Vee, and that's great. If he's doing something for you, that's great. But I couldn't listen to more than 10 minutes. If you had gone maybe a minute more, like that intensity, and maybe the problem is because I speed up all my podcasts. So if I listen to Gary Vee at 1.3, I'd probably throw myself out the car window by the time I'm done. It would just maybe too much intensity in him. So I don't know. I'm not a big, maybe I should, I don't really listen to his podcast. I catch him on his Facebook stuff all the time. And I kind of go, okay. I mean, that's kind of obvious, Gary. Like, he just takes obvious things and intensifies them.
He's the Dr. Phil of marketing.
No, totally. Yeah, that's it. It's like, you're like, if
you're thirsty, you have to drink water.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my God, Dr. Phil, you're so brilliant.
God, you're so smart. And you kind of want to go, oh, okay, well, it was like the Seinfeld episode where George walks around angry all the time, and people think he's working hard because he's under pressure and under stress all the time, and he's not. He's just acting it. And sometimes I feel like with Gary, there's a little bit of that intensity that's a little fake. That's just me. Again, that's just me.
See, I think that's I don't know. Cause on one hand you go, well, when he's on camera, the guy's on camera all the time.
Yeah.
He has a camera guy following him around. Yeah. And I'm with you. I think what I worry about is the guy that has to hustle. Like, he's got a wife and 2 kids downstairs that would love to go play catch in the backyard, but I can't because, I got to work on this landing page. I got to hustle. I agree with him to the point of like, you're not serious about something if you're spending 4 hours a week playing Xbox. That's something that probably could go unless you need time to relax or whatever. But I do worry that sometimes his hustle is people take that and go to extremes. And he finally did. I remember, I forget what I was listening to, and he talked about, he kind of backpedaled and went, because there are people that like, they hustle, and they're getting 4 hours sleep. and then they end up killing themselves because they've done all this work and they're not getting the results. And he's like, yeah, we have a serious problem in the entrepreneurial world of people with suicide. And I was like, yeah, you think you've kind of set up these expectations of, launch with your 6 figures and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not blaming Gary on all that, but
no. Listen, if you like him, listen to him. I mean, I'm just saying, for me, it's a little much. And so it's not one of those things I hang on every word and listen to all his podcasts and stuff. I can't, it's just too much intensity for me.
Nick said, I read Crush It and it changed, my mentality. My favorite audiobook probably is Crush It by Gary Vee, because I love it because he'll be reading it and he'll be like, okay, hold on, because this has changed since the book and that's BS. And then blah, blah, blah. And so I like his, and in fact, Carrie said, I like his no BS thing. And the only thing that I kind of went, was he was talking, I think it was Snapchat and blah, blah, blah. And Snapchat is going to be the next big thing. And Snapchat. And then like 4 episodes in, he's like, oh, by the way, I'm he's invested in Snapchat. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Hold on. You didn't say that 4 episodes ago. And that's why I still say, I'm waiting to find out that Gary is somehow financially involved with Anchor. Cause I'm like, what's up with that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not to be Gary Vee bashing, because he does some great work.
And I would love to have his numbers and his Well, here's the thing. I was thinking about this last night because I was this is so gonna date me. I was listening to Ronnie James Dio. Do you know who Ronnie James Dio is?
I've heard that name. Musician, right? Musician.
Yeah, he was in you've probably he's actually a singer. He sang in Rainbow. If you've ever heard Rainbow in the Dark. Or Man on the Silver Mountain, or
70s stuff, right?
70s stuff, but in the 80s, he had a minor hit with a song called Rainbow in the Dark.
Okay.
But what's interesting about it, at one point, he was in Black Sabbath, he was on the Heaven and Hell album, but he in the 80s, he kind of came across as what I call high velocity Viking music. So everything is like dun, 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 Viking music, we will pillage, and he was singing about, everything was in the night of the light of the dark of the spark. And you're like, okay, I have no idea what he's talking about. And I will ride on my steed. And I'm like, steed, it's a horse. Okay. This isn't the 18, but it was like high velocity Viking music. And I was kind of laughing at it going, what? Oh, I like the guitar player. That's why I used to listen to this stuff. And he's got a great voice. But I was like, on the other hand, Ronnie was Ronnie, man. He's gone. He died from some sort of cancer. And so to his credit, Gary, when you tune into Gary Vee, you're either going to love him or hate him. And, and so I was like, you know what? I will give Ronnie James Dio credit for being Ronnie James Dio, because it was hilarious, because Heaven and Hell was one of the more popular Black Sabbath albums back in the day. And he left, did his solo thing, and he came back and did one more album with Black Sabbath thing. We were all excited about it because Heaven and Hell was actually a pretty cool album. And nobody knew what he was talking about. It was just like, what? Of the magic of the magician, of the wizard? Like, what? It's like heavy metal music for Harry Potter. What is this? I don't get it. So, but
did Peter Gabriel write these lyrics?
Yeah. There's another guy. Well, there's another great example. When you're on stage in a giant flower costume with petals all around your head, you're pretty unique.
And a reverse mohawk, and you're singing lyrics nobody really knows what they mean. It's like, what? Yeah. Well, it just to come back on that. I don't want to sound like a Gary basher, because he's doing some good work. Just not. It's not working for me. Yeah. And this is one of those things. There's other. Choose who makes you. If it's Nick says it's changed his life, well, run with it. I mean, that's awesome. If that's what he's doing for you, good. This is the area where. I mean, hey, Gary, and I would, yeah. I mean, if it works for you, go with it. If it doesn't, don't. You don't have to. You don't have to. In the world of polarizing political views like we have right now, it doesn't have to be love, hate. It can just be.
You go do that thing. You enjoy your, yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that, because it's like, well, because if you don't like Gary Vee, that doesn't mean we absolutely hate him and he should die. Like he's
no.
We're not saying that at all. No, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So, and then Randy says I can listen to him while driving over the speed limit on the highway. Here you go. Gary V makes me want to speed.
Yeah. Well, the you know, if we the lesson from him, I mean, he is a guy of hustle, and he has hustled his way.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you know, I think sometimes he's just so uncut and so unfiltered because he just hasn't slept in about 2 or 3 months. You know, and you're like, dude, get some rest, Gary. Like, sleep. You know, back down on the intensity a little bit. But no, he's doing some great stuff. So.
What I like about him is he is kind of just. He has a lot of like, this is why I think this. Like, he has a lot of, when I was doing Wine Library TV, I did this and this, and you know, I didn't sleep for 4 weeks, and that's why I got to #1 or whatever. But there's a great YouTube video where he's talking about people like, I need a sponsor, and he's like, I don't know, just go to the phone book and find somebody and call them up and see if they want to sponsor your show. And he goes, here, somebody give me one. And he actually just picks up the phone and calls this guy, and I was like, okay, that didn't work, but it might. The guy said he might work if I get him some stuff and stuff and stuff. It was like, just do it. Quit talking about it. Quit reading about it. And I was like, that's pretty funny.
And that's a good message for a lot of people. That's a really good message to you know, to go with. I had somebody this week I was talking to, just kind of whining to me about the number of hours they were putting in at work. And I finally had to say it. I was like, hey, I might be the last guy you want to talk to about the number of hours that you're working, because I'm on all the time. I'm answering customer questions day and night. You know, I don't have any restricted hours, right? And so I am literally, until I go to sleep, and then I wake up, and then I'm back on, and it's not very many hours. And so maybe some of that intensity is like, you know, I have a pretty intense job, and I'm already in. I don't know if I need any more intensity.
That's it.
So, yeah.
Well,
anyways,
I had one here. Somebody was talking, because you talked about taking time off. I think it was last week or the week before.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a vacation right now.
Well, this is from Nick. I'm going to ruin his name. Nick A. Zano III. He says, what are people's thoughts on taking scheduled breaks, say twice a year? It has become clear to me over the past 2.5 years that I want the show to be weekly, but to do that, well, I need some downtime. It's an arts and entertainment podcast in which the conversations mostly center on comedy, music, and horror. That's an interesting combo. That doesn't really lend itself to definite seasons. If you take breaks, when do you schedule them? Are there particularly slow months to take a couple of weeks off? And I forget what Facebook group this was from, but this is, I found this out, and I was like, that's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, Jim? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, well, I think definitely, you know, when you're thinking about a schedule and taking time off, we talked about this very front of the show. You can do this, is the beauty of it. You can do whatever you want, right? So if you want to go 2 weeks on and take a week off, or do 3 shows and take a week off, do it that way. If you want to do 6 in a row and then take 4 off, that's fine. Do all those things have consequences? Yes, they do. If you do 6 and you leave for 4, there's a good chance your numbers will suffer. Not always, but people are creatures of habit, and they like that weekly. They like the regular. I'm not going to say weekly, but regular. Now, there's some exceptions to that. If your content is amazing and outstanding and it's got so much mojo, you can produce it every 3 months, a 4-hour podcast, and people go crazy over it. But that's a 1 in a million, right? That doesn't happen very often. And you've got that works because of Dan's, you know, his talent. That's why that one works. But yeah, totally. Like, just because you're weekly doesn't mean you have to do it every single week. Dave, I don't set up, I'm weekly, but I say I'm 48 out of 52. And there are weeks I don't tell my audience a couple hours ahead of time. Sometimes, hey, we're taking the night off. And the audience is kind of like, okay, I'll find something else to do tonight. Not a big deal. So, yeah, I think you could probably do it and set your own, do 2 out of 4 or do 5 out of 7 to figure out the cadence that works for you.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because my last episode for the School of Podcasting was not my favorite. I put it out and it was kind of like, I'm not super excited about this. It was interesting and it was kind of Dave. It was the whole, hey, Dave analogy thing. But I kind of put it out and was like, that wasn't my best work. That was not, because I really thought I learned some stuff in Nashville. But when I got back, I was kind of like, And then like we were talking in the pre-show, I drove, for whatever reason, I did not get tired driving home. So I got home at 3 a.m. on Saturday and said, oh, cool. And now I've got all day Sunday to record. And I'll figure something out. I've got some ideas and blah, blah, blah. and my body woke up at 8 o'clock, and I'm like, no, keep sleeping. I could use more than 5 hours sleep. And so I was just kind of fuzzy all Sunday. And so I put it out, but it just was one that I was like, I hope this is one of those where I think it's meh, and my audience goes, that was awesome. And so far that has not been the case. But I also kept it short. It wasn't a case where, okay, I'm gonna add a whole bit of this, and then I'm like, no, it was 24 minutes, and that's all she wrote. And so I try to tell people, if you can, record a couple ahead of time, and that way you're taking a break, but your audience isn't. But I think in the end,
know your audience, right? In this case, and what they want. I'm on vacation, and yet I've got a list. Like, this is how I take vacation, right? I got this list of things to get done, and it makes me feel good. Yesterday, I tied up loose ends, fixed the garage door, went out and bought some fertilizer for the lawn that's going to go down today. I went out and took care of some things. That helps me kind of recharge. And Ross is saying in the chat room, he took 6 weeks off last summer and just kind of got away from it. And for some people, it takes 6 weeks to get. You got to kind of disconnect. And when you come back, you kind of come back, you've done it right. When you come back wanting, you're like, oh, I cannot wait to get back to the podcast. In that, when you leave and you're like, oh, what am I even going to say? Sometimes you need to let a little water. Here, I'll have a Gary V moment. Sometimes you got to let a water get under the bridge.
That's it. Yeah, because I think it's good. It goes back to just, I forget what show I was listening to. It might have been Better Podcasting. We were talking about taking care of your health.
Yeah.
And if you, if you don't do that, that's a problem.
Yeah. So. And I think, I'm a Clifton Strengths guy, right? And so I always talk about how to play to your strengths. I think there's some, there could be some help in figuring out, like, okay, how am I built from a talent perspective that allows me to really use those talents in a way that are most effective. And for some of us, that's going to be, we're going to over prepare. And then when we do our podcast, it's going to be 100% ready, and it's going to be perfect. And if you're that way, keep doing it, because you create great content that's exact and awesome, right? And some of you are going to be like, I'm going to kind of do this on the fly, and I'm just going to, we'll just kind of make this thing up as we go along and whatever. And you're going to have these surprise moments where, because of that, because it's not overproduced or too planned, you're going to get these amazing interviews that nobody expected because you were in the right place at the right time. So I think, Dave, we have to kind of consider, who are we? And then what works best. I mentioned in the beginning of the show, I started writing my show notes before the show. Well, man, that has really changed some things for me. The pressure now for show notes at the end. I hated producing my show because it was these freaking show notes. And now that I have the motivation ahead of time to build them, and I build them during the week. So like today, I will set up a note that says the show for next Thursday, and I'll start collecting things into that. And then Wednesday, I kind of clean it up. And then Thursday afternoon, I get the final copy of it. Well, all that work is done. Man, that has changed my post-production mentality from stress to, oh, this is great. I can't wait to get this thing out. So figure out what works best for you.
Yeah, that's what it did for me, is by fleshing out my ideas. I was then excited about recording it, as opposed to recording it and then like, oh, now I got to do the freaking show notes. It's like, it's just, everybody I know, it's freaking show notes. Everybody knows.
It's hard. It's hard. Dan in the chat room says, I typically work a couple months ahead of time. Can't be working last minute. Yeah. Like, it's sometimes your schedule won't allow for that. So you've got to be more planned in advance. Ross, in talking about his vacation, he said he could barely do one show a week, and I came back doing like 4 or 5 live streams a week, as in shows, not mobile talk and not mobile walk and talk things. Okay. Oh yeah, like what you do, when you're out, just the Facebook lives. Yeah. The other thing to think about is the way you're producing these. For some of us, we don't want to do all the nitty gritty website, right? Find ways to create quicker, faster podcasts then, if you don't want to do all the work on the back end to create show notes, and maybe do them more frequently, but do them shorter. Find a way that works where people will actually listen, or that works for you. Do the thing that you like to do. Do it the way you would like to do it. You might be starting something and going like, oh, nobody does it this way. That might be a good indication that you should. Like, maybe this is a new thing.
Right.
We don't know it yet.
Absolutely. Well, you know what's not new? our fun filled awesome supporters. That's right. They've been around for a while, some of them. And in the event I didn't fix this last week, we need double thanks to Josh Liston from onthebubblepodcast.com. It's a show about TV shows that probably got canceled in some cases, and what the audience did to try to get it back on the air. So he actually digs into all these shows that and some of them I never heard of, like the Sarah who's the girl from Terminator? Sarah something. Sarah Connor Chronicles. But I didn't even know that was a TV show. And apparently it was with a very rabid fan base. So and then we have Greg from debtshepherd.com, which is all about teaching financial wellness. Jonathan Bloom from Weekly Inspiration. It's about being great today. You can find that at weeklyawesome.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert, who will be coming back on the School of Podcasting shortly. I was talking to him yesterday on Facebook. Find him over at horseradionetwork.com. Josh Rivers from podcastingexperiments.com, who's also kind of coming. Here's something he talked about. I always say how babies are like, can be a serious hurdle for podcasters. Try moving from one place when you have to pick up everything you own and move it. He's like, that's why he hasn't been on the mic. Max Trescott from aviationnewstalk.com and Shane from spybrary.com. Those are our awesome supporters, and I haven't fixed this from the first of the month. So that's okay. There we go. So thanks for all our awesome supporters. If you'd like to support the show, simply go out to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, and my PowerPoint will not die. There we go.
Hey, we're 1 week closer to Emily's book, by the way. I'm pretty excited about it.
There we go.
I'm pretty excited about that coming out. What a great community project that's been in a lot of ways. And I just, to watch her, I listened to Emily before when she was on before the Story Behind, and Emily, because it's this, you get podcasting and you kind of start forgetting things. So I forgot the name of the podcast. What was her podcast before?
Something cheese, wine.
Yeah, but that's what they had, cheese and wine during the show. It's her and Jane.
Cute little
classy little podcast. Thank you. There we go. Classy little podcast. So listen to that, and then this move into a podcast. And then I don't think she thought when she was starting the Story Behind that it would be a book. Like, right. do you start a podcast thinking, someday I'm going to turn this into a book? And so to watch her go through that, I think is just is a real testimony of what can be done if you're just available. Like, I don't think she planned this. I think it was just someone said, hey, we should put that into a book. And she's like, okay. And so it's really cool. October 15th, as that's coming out, it's available for pre-order. I think if you don't have it, you should be picking it up. Yeah.
And the other thing is that she didn't do is I see people do this. I haven't done it in a while, but I approach bloggers. If I find somebody's blog through some sort of Google search, I'm like, wow, this is really good. And I see they don't have a podcast. I've reached out to them and going, have you ever thought of turning this into a podcast? And I get the answer on occasion, I'm just a writer. I'm just going to stay a writer. And I'm like, so they say no, basically.
Yeah.
And so, they came up to her and said, hey, we'd like to, turn your podcast into a book. She didn't say no. Right. And part of you goes, well, of course she didn't say no, but there are people that would go, no, I'm just a podcaster. I'm not a writer, and I'm like, because who knows, that book might lead to somebody reading that who then goes, hey, whatever. We don't know what door that's going to open, if any, or a ton, but the cool thing is she can say she did it, and she can say, yeah, my book is on Amazon, and that's fun. So
I've found this new genre new for me on YouTube of these guys building boats. I mean, like yachts, like these big ships out of oak and live oak and, timber, these timber ships. And I found one and I thought, well, this is the only guy out there. And then I started digging in, and there's, I won't say hundreds, there might be hundreds. But between that and guys that do timber frame stuff, I've really gotten into it, and they're talking about building out the keel and putting in the framing of this thing. And we're talking about hand-honed wood. And I mean, this is, and you would think like the keel by itself on one of these ships takes these guys maybe a year. They got to find the piece of wood. They got to let it dry out. They've got to cut it to its size. They've got to shape it and mold it and work it and grind it and get it just perfect. And it might take a year just to get the keel. And for most of us, we'd be like, oh, that's just too much work. Like,
Right.
you know, this ship, in a lot of cases, these folks are working on ships. They're fixing ships that are hundreds or 100 years old. So think about what they're doing. They're building these things that could last for 100 years. We live in a culture that doesn't even expect anything to live beyond 2 years, you know? And so
buy a new one. Yes.
Well, and I take it back to Emily in the book she did, in that she's spending a lot of time editing, writing, rewriting, writing again, editing, coming up with content, thinking about things. But that book will last years as opposed to a podcast that might last months.
Right.
And it's just been, for me, it's been one of those questions I put in my head of what am I building that could last more or could outlive me or could last more than a week, you know, in a podcast. And not that we all have to have those kinds of things, but I think the possibilities for us are there to create things that go longer than Friday night, you know, and so it has been, I've been mesmerized by these shipbuilding YouTube videos. I'm watching, I'm getting to know the guys. I even supported one on Patreon, you know, I'm like it's this guy building a ship by himself. And I thought this is really cool. So I guess I want to encourage the community, think about like, what are you doing that's going to last, you know, that could last just beyond a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And it really could be a legacy.
I think that's one of the reasons why Randy Cantrell started his show, was because he had grandkids. And a lot of his advice in that show is just kind of like, you know, it could be passed down. It's evergreen. In fact, Randy actually put in the chat room, I just discovered this when I was going to Nashville. I was blowing through a ton of podcasts that I normally don't get to listen to. And he says a couple months ago, I went to a 10-minute, give or take, Monday through Friday show because, you ready for this? It's what he wanted to do. And he decided to do it, and he did. And he says, and he's finding it easier than, because he used to have, you know, these, not super long. They weren't long in the first place, but they weren't
any longer than us.
Yeah.
Yeah. An hour.
And it was, you know, through the whole thing. And now he's just like, here's a quick idea. He goes in and here's the idea. Here's why. Here's a little story about being a, you know, stereo salesman back in the day, blah, blah, blah. And we're done. And it's cool. It's, I have a playlist in Overcast called Short Shows. And it's Randy, it's Emily, it's the guys from marketing school. So if I'm like just taking a trip to the grocery store, it's like 5 minutes. I'm like, all right, let's go to the short shows. And it always makes me feel super productive because I'll look at my Overcast, like you have 110 episodes waiting for you. And then I'll like blow through a bunch of Randy's. I'm like, okay, I'm down to 89. I'm like, okay, cool. So,
well, I'm reminded of a preacher, his name, or pastor. His name was Chuck Swindoll. You should probably know that name, Dave. And pastored a church out in California for a lot of years, then moved out to Dallas. And he used to do sermons that would be put into pamphlets. And so people could, he was actually doing podcasting before we called it podcasting. You could get cassette tapes in the mail from this guy, right? These series. And those series would be turned into these loose leaf, you know, they might be 8 in a series. And then those 8 series would be turned into a book with 12 chapters. So after 12 series, he would do a book and it would all tie together. And then you could buy the book, you could buy the series, you could listen to it. And it was the amazing amount of planning that had to go into that to get all that content put together. But here was a guy that took just what he was doing on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, and turned it into something that was going to last a while. And I guess that was my point, is sometimes things that last take us a little bit longer to put together. And so we've got some opportunities with that. And it's just encouraged me to kind of think through. And Emily's done this with Story Behind. How do I take this podcast and make it last a little bit longer? Well, in a book, it's going to last a little bit longer, you know? So a lot of time it's worth it.
It'll be interesting to see, you know, because she's got the marketing. I just listened to the Jordan Harbinger show, and he had some New York Times bestselling author on the show, and they were talking about booking, which was interesting because he brought him on to help answer questions. But in the same time, you could hear Jordan slowly extracting, like, how did you do this? Why did you go self-published on this one? Why did you go big publisher on that one? Because Jordan's thinking about writing a book. I'm like, there's a great idea. You invite somebody on your show that you need the information in their head, and then you have them as a guest. And he was saying it's the fact that a book is a great business card in some ways. A lot of people see that as a way of, you know, making you the official big shot smarty pants, because you have a book.
Yeah.
And so
but
it'll last.
Some people, Dave, now I'm saying this, I'm going to contradict myself. Some people think the book is the end result. Like, I can't be a person, famous, influential, whatever word you want to stick in there, until I have my own book. And I don't think that's true. Like, I don't think the logical conclusion for everybody is a book. In the sense that you just don't, that's not the next logical thing you do to do those kinds of things. For some of you, you have it in you and it's awesome. For others, listen, I'm never going to write a book. And I just don't think you have to have one. I've worked with some folks in the past who said, oh no, the next thing I got to do is to be an influencer, to get invited to keynotes, to do some of these kinds of things. I have to have a book. And I'm like, would it help? Yeah, totally. Does it really matter? I don't know. I've listened to a lot of keynotes who I've never heard of their book before, nor have they sold more than 100 copies of it. Right. And you're kind of like, So if you want to write a book, I'm not saying don't write a book. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be a book. The next thing doesn't have to be a book.
Right. Yeah. Could be a course. It could be whatever you want.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a book. It could be a ship.
Well, I had somebody, I forget who it was that contacted me that said they've started a product now that they never would have started until they jumped into their podcast and jumped into their niche. And then they're like, oh, wow, these people need this. And I wouldn't have known that had I not started his podcast. He goes, and now I understand their needs and their wants. And he goes, and so I created the product that they need based on them going, we need this. He goes, and consequently it sold. And it was like, he goes, but I wouldn't have come up with that product unless I started the podcast. Yeah. He's like, so sometimes, some people who are in podcasting for the money, they're trying to, really jump in and just sell. And he goes, I jumped in and then I found out what they needed and then went back and created the product. I was like, that's not a bad insight.
Yeah. Well, it's something you got to think about. I, in my own, for myself, as I think through this, like my thing is live. And that's what I do better than anything else that I do, is creating these live podcasts. We had a little debate on Twitter over the week on this, and some folks were saying, oh yeah, I always have to re-listen to the show because the live is always kind of, the live is always kind of sloppy and it doesn't always work as well. And some of those other things. And one of my listeners from Home Gadget Geeks goes, oh, no. You haven't listened to Jim's stuff on Thursdays. You ought to, that's like a podcast, but it's live. And I think about what I do with you, and I think about the 2 shows that I do on my own network, and I think about the 3 shows that I do at Gallup, and they're all really driven, and the best engagement is around the live audience. I mean, think about this. We've got 15 or so out here today. It's been as high as 30 or 40. Everybody's super engaged. The best stuff, at least the best stuff that I do, is live. The podcast is just a after effect of it. Like, oh, okay, I'll publish it so people can listen to it. But my favorite, and I think my best, is live.
It's definitely a different feel when you have people listening to you. It's like, I need to probably think about what I'm saying.
Well, and Dave, you and I get feedback all the time from people who say they listen because they like the chemistry between you and I. And we didn't force that or plan it. We didn't know it was going to happen. We just started podcasting together and it kind of worked. And so, we fell into it. Yeah.
It was the awesome plan of having Jim come on the show was Jim goes, hey, do you want to co-host? And I went, okay, sure. I've never done that. Let's do that. That was it.
Let's come. You want to come? Actually, I think it was even worse than that. I was like, hey, do you want to do this again next weekend? like, okay, sounds good. I'll see you at 9:30. And, it was one of those things we kind of fell into by accident. But so for me, I don't have a lot of, I find for me, the greatest value for me is in doing these live shows. The podcasts themselves are great, and I get some audience feedback and I get emails from those guys, and it's great. But what I really dig is being out here on a Saturday morning and having Addie and Michael and Roy and Carrie and Eileen and Mike and Ross and Emily and Daniel and Kim and Dan, and all in the chat room. And that's pretty awesome. Like, and so that's for me, that's what works for me. I love creating live shows. So that just works.
I did have another interesting question come up. This is from, how are we doing on time? Oh, good. This will be perfect. Jacob Houter, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He says, we've done 7 episodes. So first of all, congratulations. You made it to episode 7. He says, we've done 7 episodes of gaming podcasts so far, and things are going well, but I wanted to incorporate some other creators. I want to bring in guests, and we have some lined up, but if the show starts doing well, guests on shows like these do they get compensated? Do you have them sign something saying they agree for you to use their voice and likeness and logo? Do you tell them anything ahead of time to try to have a quiet space and don't eat during recording? I hope so. That'd be bad. Am I putting too much thought on this? I typically just have friends on. So the one that caught my eye there, because we've talked about this in the past, 99.9% of the time, nobody's getting compensated to come on your show. In theory, you're paying them with exposure because they want to get in front of your audience. And but yeah, I know, Jim, do you still have you used to have a URL for your checklist?
I do. I think it's still theaverageguy.tv/guest. Although I haven't sent anybody. My show changed a little bit, and so I rarely send. I wonder if that works anymore. But I rarely send folks. But it's good to have a checklist.
Yeah, and I always, at the end of my interviews, if I can remember, now I forget about this a lot because 9 times out of 10 I'm interviewing a friend, but I try to say, is there anything that we talked about that you would not want released? That's my little audio release. And then I don't put that in the podcast. I always keep the original file so I can always go back in the event I completely just hork it in some way or another. But that's my little audio release. And then what I do is when I had somebody last night, it was fun. I was her first interview. And so she goes, well, what do you usually do here? And I go, well, I let them know that it's not live. And so if things mess up, we can go back and fix it. And, I said, I let them know who the audience is. I let them know how long the episode typically is. And I said, that helps them shape, am I doing the short, medium, or long answer? And I said, and then just kind of go from there. And she's like, well, do I record my intro now? I go, you can. I go, but I've often re-recorded my intro because I found some golden nugget in the interview, and I'll re-record the intro. And I said, I usually just I always start off with welcome to the show. And they'll go, hey, it's really great to be here. And I said, and you can do kind of whatever you want at the beginning of that. I said, and if I do, this is what some people go, I got somebody like, well, you can do that. I might ask like fluffy questions, like, what got you into podcasting? And, what kind of microphone do you use? And then finally, my third question is like, tell me about the time when blah, blah, blah. I might actually cut the 2 fluffy questions because my audience wants really, there's a reason why there's a skip intro on Netflix now. People want to get to the good stuff. And so there are times when I'll actually do that. Yeah. Miss Eileen says Joe Pardo from Podcast Mid-Atlantic is charging his guests. Speaking of that, podcastmidatlantic.com. If you want a t-shirt, you need to order your tickets to Podcast Mid-Atlantic, better known as MapCon in some cases, because he's ordering the t-shirts, and it says Podfessional has this cool little audio thing above it. So if you want a t-shirt, you better go order your tickets. Joe does. And I believe John Lee Dumas is now charging for guests.
It's not wrong, by the way. Not wrong. You can, it's no different than charging advertisers. It's the same. It's the same thing. We want to, as a community, we went a little bit sideways on this. We've done it a couple times in the podcast groups where we get a little self-righteous on this. And, people are like, this guy's charging $50. That should never happen. And it's like, hey guys, that's advertising. Actually, that's what that is. And if he's not getting it, then he has no guests. But if he or she is charging and they're getting it and it's working, then it's called advertising. It's not wrong.
Yeah, the only thing I've ever had a problem with that is if I have a podcast about podcasting and then somebody goes, hey, I'll pay you $100 to let me come on and talk about knitting. Okay, well that's, I could do that, but here's the thing. And that's just, to me, I go, I think that would be bad. But on the other hand, feel free to do that because you're not going to last long if you're just letting anybody like, what's the requirement for being a guest on your show? Oh, you have to pay me $100 and you have to have a pulse. Okay, well, you're not. Your audience isn't going to stick around for that. So.
Well, and you're making the determination what's good for your audience. And if that was good for your audience, then yeah, maybe it would be, maybe it does fit. Like having you on my tech show, Dave, and I don't charge, but let's just say I did. That might make sense for you because you're a podcaster to get in front of some, my audience, 35 to 55 computer systems administrators, lots of disposable income, right? They purchase things. And you might want to, getting podcasting in front of a bunch of tech people, it may make sense. And so if I was charging for that, or you came to me and said, hey, I want to be on your show and I'm going to pay you $100 to do it. I may consider that because it may actually fit. But it's up to the podcaster, right? If you wanted to take the $100 and do knitting, and you thought it was, it could, or your audience might go, "What the?" Like,
yeah, exactly.
Seriously, if you did a knitting podcast on a School of Podcasting, even if you charged for it, you'd have to ask yourself the question: is this worth losing listeners?
That's it.
Because I think your audience would be like, "What the, Dave? What are you doing? This isn't Binky and the Wiz. Well, you can get away with Binky and the Wiz." But
all right, we got another quick question here. This is from Miriam Perez Gilmore. Super vulnerable question, she said, which caught my eye right there. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. This is not what's my favorite microphone. Does anyone have a bit of anxiety about promoting your podcast or YouTube channel on your social media because friends and family have no idea what or why you're doing this, and you may be judged? My podcast / YouTube really has nothing to do with my current business or work. Just wondering if the only person that feels this way.
Yes.
And
I feel that way. Yes.
You're like,
no, totally. I totally avoid my own Facebook channels, my friends and family. They're a bunch of judgmental judgers of judging things. Right. And you're just like, no, I don't want, I want strangers who won't judge me for knowing who I am. Right. That's what I think, by the way.
Well, that is funny because I have 2 Facebook profiles. It just dawns on me now. I actually do that without even thinking about it because I want my family Facebook to be pictures of nieces and nephews and cousins. And I don't want to like, hey, sign up for my newsletter to my cousins.
Right.
So it's not that I'm worried about them being judging. I just want that for that. But the other thing I commented, I said, if you're worried about being judging, or if you're worried about being judged, I go, welcome to America. Half the TV shows that are on right now are people being judged and then voted off and whatever. I said, you're going to be judged. I said, look, you may not realize it, but when you go to the grocery store, the people behind you are judging you by how much stuff you have in your cart.
Oh, I do it all the time.
When you get on a plane and you're walking and you look over and you see the person is in your aisle, you're like, oh, am I happy to sit next to? Is this person a talker?
Right.
You're getting judged all the time. So if you think you're not getting judged, I will judge you and say you're crazy. So it's like, because you are, but
it is what we do. But with family, Dave, it's hard. And I don't know. Tell me what you think. Is that an audience worth the energy, the time and effort to reach, or not? When I first started doing the Gallup podcast, actually the audience I was afraid of the most was the employees. Like I almost didn't want them to listen. I was like, no, because they know how the sausage is made, right? And you're like, I'm not sure I want you to listen. And for a lot of years, maybe for the first 2 years, my smallest audience was our own employees. Well, they started listening and they started coming back to me saying, like, I'd see them in the morning and they'd be like, hey, I listened to you on the way in today, and you're like, oh. And at first I said, I'm sorry. And like, no, it was really good. Like, I appreciated it. So do you think that audience, Dave, is one worth marketing to? Is your family worth marketing to, knowing it's a different kind of audience?
I think so. And the reason for this, and this is my background, I used to get I used to design websites for people. I'm like, if you just need a basic website, I'm your guy. And my sister-in-law is a teacher in the Akron Public Schools, and she ran into so many people that were like, yeah, I need to build a website. I just don't know what to do. Oh, my brother-in-law does that. And she had cards and she sent me so much stuff. So I think sometimes if your family can be a great marketing channel because they want to see you do well. And I guess, for that was just me being me. Oh, Dave's a big nerd, that's, of course he does websites and of course he does podcasts and things like that. So I never really worried about them judging me. So,
but did you ever get that question? Like, so maybe not today, but early, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, like, what is this thing that you're doing?
When I walked over before I went to Philadelphia, it was my brother's birthday. So we had this birthday thing for him. And I walk over and they're like, hey, Mr. Hall of Fame. And so finally my cousin goes, all right, I'm going to ask the question. And I go, what's that? And she goes, what's a podcast? She's like, what do I do with these things? I hear you talk about them all the time. And I go, do you have an iPhone? And she goes, yeah. And my other cousin's like, I got one. And her husband's like, okay, cool. Everybody, I just did a little tutorial. Look for this purple thing. Okay. Now what are you interested in? Oh, I like golf. I like this. I'm like, good. Type that in, hit play. There you go. Do you like it? Okay. Click subscribe, but yeah. So there are a lot of people. Well, there's only 17% of America that listen to podcasts on a weekly basis. And I think that's sad. You need to let me know, does this come through? In theory, you shouldn't hear anything.
No.
Okay,
nope.
good.
Not hearing it.
Because I'm starting we have 2 minutes and 5 seconds until the show is over. Awesome. So, but yeah, so it was kind of funny that they're like, hey, what is this podcast thing?
I know. And it's a little embarrassing when they say it, to you, but then you always kind of say, well, yeah, here's what I'm doing. This is, I reach an audience of 500 to 1,000. We do these things. And they almost always go, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so what you thought was going to be judgment is actually like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I think it's a good audience to reach. It's the hardest one, prophet in his own hometown. Right. So it's the hardest one to reach, but I think you should try.
I think my favorite quote from the Messengers is Danny Pena's dad goes, Danny, I have no idea what you do, but I'm so proud of you.
I know my mom still has no idea. She's like, are you on the radio? What are you? Why are you? She just sees, because she's in all my social channels. So she sees all that stuff.
Yeah. Paul Culligan's mom thinks he's on the radio because she can listen on iHeartRadio.
Right.
Like,
right on.
Okay.
On. Actually, I can reach a bigger audience, Mom. I can reach a bigger audience.
Exactly. So, well, Jim, what's I know you're talking news and stuff. Any news articles you're going to be talking about?
Actually, on the latest, TheAverageGuy.tv, some really easy ways and cheap ways to get in on home automation. So Amazon made some really good deals right now. If you want to get in some devices, no hubs needed, for like $10, we're doing that. And guess what? GPUs, remember these things that were too expensive because of crypto? Right. They're back on the menu. So they've gotten inexpensive again. They're back to their pre-crypto prices. So if you've been holding off on buying a graphics card for your PC, now's the time to start looking. We talk about all of that at TheAverageGuy.tv.
And on the School of Podcasting, I may have an interview with Danny Pena. I'll find that out later today. And I'll be reviewing some sort of gear because I have buckets of it laying around here. So, but thanks for tuning in. We're here every Saturday. Ask the Podcast Coach. Stay tuned for some post-show. And here's a fun one. This is from Lauren.
Is it spelled HMMMM?
Yeah. Yes, Lauren. Lemunion. She says, I'm so excited. This is from I forget, it was some sort of podcast conference group. I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was part of this group. And she says, I'm so excited. I just confirmed my first podcast sponsor. I decided to stop making excuses about how many downloads I needed in order to be worth it and just go for it. I created the following sponsorship prospects page, which I'll put in the show notes here in a second, and made the pitch to one of my favorite companies, which I'm also a subscriber of. And they just said, yes, whatever you're making an excuse about, whatever you're making an excuse about not having enough of, cut it out, take the risk. What's the worst thing that could happen? That's one of my favorite lines. What's nobody's going to punch you in the face. But here's the thing. I'll put a link in the chat room. It is spitfirecoach.com/sponsor. And it's a clean little page. In fact, since the post show always has video stuff, we might as well just do this. And so it's, what is Spitfire Podcast? Here's the numbers. So 100 to 600 downloads per show, 1,000 downloads per month, 22 to 55 minutes per length. But when you get down,
I need to do this. This is such a good idea. I don't know why I've been holding off on a media page like this.
Yeah, exclusive, one sponsor per episode, 30-second host read, permanent replay. But here's the thing: she's only charging $18. But I thought about that. Let's go up here.
Well, so what's the CPM? Yeah,
that's what I was trying to figure out, because I'm like, if she's using CPM, that drives me.
Use 400, so 18 by 400, because that's probably what she's averaging, right?
Right. So if we do that, 18 divided by 400 is 2 cents a download. Yeah. So if we dime that by times 1,000, I should be able to do that one in my head. It's $20.
Yeah, but CPM. I think this. So if you scroll back down a little bit and lock on you, so I'm not showing up there. Okay. But so what I like about this single episode is that can be a loss leader for you to get a bigger sponsor. So because really especially if you're getting great page views, or if you have another channel where you're getting, it doesn't have to, being on the show is not the be all end all of your advertising, right? You could have a banner spot on your site that's more expensive. Those things, I have my app, my iPhone and Android app that's made through Spreaker. That's a $500 sponsorship spot. LastPass just vacated. So they've done it for the last 4 years maybe. And they just notified me they wouldn't be renewing. Well, hey, I got a new spot that's open, right? That's in $500. That's easy advertising. That's a mention on the show every week, and that's super easy to do. Basically, it pays for the cost of the app plus some advertising that I buy with it. I'm going to turn that over to my Patreon supporters. So now the app is going to be supported by Patreon, or the Patreon supporters. But I like this idea of this single episode as being a loss leader into a sponsorship. Hey, let's try this and see how it works. You should have some way of measuring it. So there should be a coupon code or something along the line. So you can go back to that sponsor and say, hey, you're really popular with my audience. For X number of dollars more, we could do these kinds of things. So I think that's that's the orange juice of podcasting.
And I forget what Lauren, that's her last name there. And in case anybody wonders, this is my Trello. So what's happening here is I will now take this and drag this over here. So this is what we've talked about this week on the show. But I did just happen to notice, again, I don't know Lauren from anybody. Notice what she has at the top: RSVP for the Spitfire book launch on event. So there's another podcaster with a book. Because I was like, I wonder what her show's about. So if we go over to her homepage, we'll do a little podcast homepage rodeo here. You started your business. There's her book. If I want to listen to her podcast, good. She does have a play button. So, but I'm assuming that she's a coach. Is that what you would think from this?
Well, so it's a Spitfire coach.
Yeah. So that's going to be it. Yeah. So
I would assume so. Click on our services.
Oh, hold on. Let me go back.
No, that's okay. Yeah, click on our services there. Oh, coaching is the number one, so that's good. Yeah, man, great use of pictures, by the way.
Yeah,
she's doing a great job there. Scroll back down for me, single session, and then and maybe some of my Gallup coaches could learn from this thing. Yeah, yep, that's awesome. No, she's doing great, and that packages, that's clear. That's actually really good. That's a nice setup there. Real clear, real concise. Not trying to hide it. So many coaches try and hide their prices. Throw some prices out there. She's not cheap, but a good coach is worth every penny.
Yeah, and then Spitfire the book.
Yeah. Carrie says hire a professional photographer for your website images. Yeah, this is again one of those things. Like if you're building a boat, and all you've got is a saw, you're going to have trouble. You're going to need to get some help. You're going to need to get some help and buy some other tools. And a lot of times we can't. We're just not talented to be able to make them ourselves.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. That just and she's like, look, I just, and you can't adjust something until you throw it out there and go, so.
Yeah. Hey, this week, real quick before we move on, Daniel, not only is he back, but I had on my list of things to do. I did this while I was on vacation. Was to fix my social subscribe page at theaverageguy.tv. And I know Daniel's done some updates. I haven't followed. I actually didn't stay current on my maintenance for his plugin. And for social subscribe and follow. And so I paid that yesterday, and then I spent some time getting updated, and like I had missed the whole Apple Podcast thing. It was time to change from the Google Play Store to the Google Podcasts. He's got images for all that stuff, makes it super easy to set up. I went through and pruned my subscribe page, so it just didn't have everything in the world. Like you could subscribe. There's 18 million ways you can subscribe, right? I kind of pared it down. So it's a fun exercise to go back through and fix my subscribe page. And then his plugin makes it so it's well worth it. It's well worth the price. Whatever he's charging, it's well worth the price.
Yeah. I think he said on the Podcasters Roundtable, we were talking about it. And I think he said there's like 51 different places you can subscribe to.
Oh, his list is super long. But it really, and I'm a big fan. I don't even take advantage because I have multiple podcasts on my site. Here you can see it on my screen here. The teal is Home Gadget Geeks. The orange, it's not really orange, but close enough, is Cyber Frontiers. Got that running on a single site. So I use a short code, which works great, and I can put short code in there and make it do its thing. Oh, good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, this is my page. If you want it, I've actually got a link. If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com, subscribe and follow, that'll get you right there.
Good. It's yeah.
And I have quite a few here that I'm like, because these are places you can subscribe, and then this is my social links. And so, but I have the big giant Apple and Google at the top. So
yep. And I went in and changed everything to just kind of be current with what I had, and I still have probably too many links in here. Took out a podcast I wasn't doing anymore. Updated some pieces to I took out some, like I had Tumblr, and I'm never on Tumblr, so took that off. And just did some general cleanup. So Daniel, thanks for your work. Good to have you back as well. And thanks for your work in doing those. For me, I think the easiest way to create these social icons without having to be a designer. I mean, he's done all the hard work for you, and it's saved me so much time in what I did. So a really great, one of my favorite plugins for sure.
Ross asks, am I using the MixPre 6 or the DBX or both? Right now, I'm not using the DBX because I need to go grab a cable out of the closet and plug the DBX into the MixPre.
I think you sound better without it, Dave. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. But I don't have my big bottom, and I don't have.
I like this better. I think that. Okay, I'm about to say a little blasphemy.
Oh,
I think that the DBX it's muddy for you. It creates a lot of mud on that mic. That's such a good mic, and straight through. Like I have noticed all day today, I just really like listening to you more on this than I did through the DBX. So I wouldn't put it back in.
So basically what you're saying is
don't do that. Just please don't do that.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, no, I wouldn't put it back in. I like it without it.
I probably over the years have done what most people do, which is just boosted everything a bit too much, a little too much bass, because that's one thing. I've been attending Chris Curran's audio podcast engineering school, and I'm learning that a little goes a long way, because he'll go in like, okay, I'm going to back this down like, minus 0.2. And I'm like, seriously, 0.2?
Yeah.
Really?
Sometimes a little goes a long way to making you sound really bad too. So, just our natural stuff is sometimes good enough.
But this is what Ross, you're on if I remember right, he's a Mac guy, right?
I don't know.
But I've learned that if you're on a Mac, you have to go into the MIDI settings and set it to not be you go in your MIDI parameters and say for this device, and it'll show the different channels. On a PC, you have to load what are called ASIO drivers. And I found out, because I was free. First of all, here's the fun thing. If you're using Audacity on a PC does not recognize ASIO drivers until you, apparently, and I haven't done this yet, go over and have them render a new version of Audacity for you. Like, you can do it. You just have to go over and say, yeah, I'd like to order one copy of Audacity with ASIO capability.
They probably have a plugin already set in their version. Yeah.
So that was not exactly what I would call easy. In Hindenburg, you have to go in and say, I'm using ASIO drivers, because I was freaking out because it would only show 2, and I'm trying to record the podcast rodeo show. Well, the whole point of that show is no show prep, plug in a mic, listen, talk, done, and I couldn't do it because it was playing. I would hit play and I could hear the thing I was reviewing, but it was on my mic channel, and I'm like, wait, I need those separate, and I was really freaking out. And so I finally figured that out. And then there's another weird thing. I don't know if you have this on a Mac, but the device was set to 48 kilohertz, and my computer was 44.1. And when I went to talk, did I mention this last week where I sounded like Herman Munster? Like all of a sudden I just sounded like this. It wasn't like Darth Vader, but I just sounded like this. And it was like, welcome to the podcast rodeo show. I'm like, what's going on? And I just had to go into the sound, and you have to dig like one screen more and go into properties. And that's where I saw it was like set to DVD 48 kilohertz, blah, blah, blah. And I changed that, and everything is working fine. So it's just a little stuff, but I think Daniel's working on a course. I know I'm going to be working because I've already had people from the school of podcasting going, great, show me how to use this thing.
Do you have a link for that? Are you an affiliate for them now?
I am.
So how would, if someone was going to buy one of these things,
they would go to bestpodcastinggear.com, which I'm proud to say is the ugliest website I own right now. And you'll see a link right there for a video of me. This is an old video when I was borrowing one. Or you'll see a link there. The Mix Pre is $649. The Mix Pre 6 is $899. The other thing that Daniel helped me out with, I had spent, because I was like, there's a phrase that I'm learning is not a good phrase to use. And that phrase is might as well. I don't think anything that comes after that is usually, you know what? Screw it. I've already had ice cream. Might as well have pizza.
Exactly.
It's usually not might as well build a school for poor kids. That's usually not the way that phrase goes. And so I had bought from B&H, they make a stand for the Mix Pre stuff. It's $150. And I'm like, well, you spent $900 on the thing. Might as well blow another $150. It's only, 20% interest on my credit card or whatever. And so Daniel was like, hey, since you got one of these, it's literally, I had the case. But it came it was in my mailbox because I was freaking out because I got the thing from my Amazon. It's like, hey, your thing has been delivered. I open up my door and there's no box.
Like a box this size, right? Yeah. Super small.
And it's this is it.
Yeah.
And it's this little itty bitty thing, and it's cool.
Is that Manfrotto?
Manfrotto?
Is that what's the brand name on that?
Yeah, Manfrotto.
Yeah, Manfrotto. Yeah.
So it's
that's a really good brand.
And it's made for cameras,
mm-hmm.
but there's the Mix Pre sitting in my extremely messy desk, sitting here. Cause who doesn't have, a bunch of mics, an H5 nose clipper. That's great. Lights thing. And it
has a camera mount on the bottom.
Yeah. And so it's got a camera mount, but this is the little itty bitty stand.
That's dynamite.
And you just adjust the little spring. I really thought, well, that's not going to work, but I just needed it to link up, and I need to figure out I know how. There's a way you can adjust the brightness of that, because every time I take a video of that, nobody can see the screen. But it's pretty handy. So, but that was $17 versus $150, and I was so happy to see that B&H had not shipped it yet. I'm still locked on this, by the way. They had not shipped it yet. Yeah, you don't need to see Jim. And so I was able to go in right in the email that sent. It said, hey, here's your order, blah, blah, blah. I click here to check on it. And they even had a button. It's like, click here to cancel it. So I clicked on it and said, please cancel. And they were like, okay, hasn't even been packed yet. So
sweet.
Cool.
Sweet. Hey, you've probably noticed for the last 4 years we've been doing it, there's been an item on my shelf right here.
Oh,
that is now no longer there. So you encouraged me last weekend. We were talking. You're like, I'm going to start selling some stuff. Like, you know what? There's no reason to have a Blue Yeti sitting on my shelf right here. So on Sunday of last week, I put on Facebook $50, and you get it was a great deal because you got the mic. Now the mic's like 4 years old, but you get the mic, the shock mount, and the what else? The Blue Yeti windscreen, right? And I put it on Facebook. It was sold in 30 minutes.
I was going to say that would be
gone. I met a guy in a parking lot, and I met him in a Starbucks last Sunday. One of the local Starbucks right here. He drove actually about 45 minutes to come pick it up.
Wow.
And he wanted it that day. And I'm like, well, I have family over. He's like, well, today's the day. I'm like, well, I'll meet you at Starbucks. So a really good, I just finally let go of it, and I'm going to let go of some more stuff. I've got a bunch of crap around here. They keep adding to it. Like I just got this.
I've got 4 portable recorders.
I had a vendor reach out to me this week and say, hey, would you be on our podcast, or could we be on your podcast? And I'm like, not until you send me some equipment. So these are hard to see, but this is a little, these are Wi-Fi cams, security cams.
Oh, nice.
That you can just stick up wherever you want. And it's like, hey, they're from Snap. So this is called it's Z-Moto Snap Pro. And they send some stickers and some other things you can put on your. So we've given them a try. Here we'll do a little unboxing right in front of you. But this is the size of the camera, so you can just stick this up in the corner or outside or whatever. They're rated for weather, so you can put them outside if you want.
Nice.
And you charge them up. They last about a quarter. The batteries do. So we'll be giving those a try. But No, I don't say that because I want you to buy the equipment. I say that because that was one of those situations where they even sent me a return shipping label on the inside, which is cool. Because they contacted me. How many times do we get contacted via email for, hey, I want to advertise on your site or whatever? And I just said, well, I need some gear if we're going to do this. And they just said, okay. So, it's worth asking back. Hey, Kim had a question in there. She's getting a little buzz in her audio, and it sounds like it's random, and it's this little bloop. And to me, sometimes that sounds like static discharging on something. In other words, the static builds up and then it discharges and it goes away. That can absolutely affect and will show up on your recording, but you won't hear it because it's somewhere between your microphone and the PC. I think she's using Adobe Audition to get it done. I would go through and check all of your cables, make sure they're tight. 2, I would go check all your cables and make sure they're not cheap, because the cheaper the cable, the more chance you have for interference.
And the other one I would definitely look at is your power cable, and try to have it avoid crossing the mic cables, because that has electromagnetic whatever. And it's sad to think that I once had an electronics degree, and I'm like, the power thingy,
the thing that does the thing.
That would work. But the other thing is, if you can, like right now, I have my headphones plugged into the MixPre 6. I could probably plug it into the computer. Maybe I would probably hear you, depending on how it's set up. But I always try to monitor through whatever I'm recording on. So if I was recording on an H5, I would plug into that. Just because
she has wires everywhere. So that may be your advice. Cable management can be your friend. Getting those all kind of separate from each other and at least testing it, right? Get things separate. So have it recording, move some stuff around, like start recording and then move stuff around and just see if you get that. If it stays, if it goes away, record with no sound. In other words, turn your mics, mute all your mics, and then just hit record and see if you're getting that even without the mics being on. It could be coming from your mics. So,
and Daniel says, keep your phone away. That's true. I've had that happen. Where your phone is, which is always fun that you're walking around with that thing next to your head for an hour. And when you put it next to things, you're like, I've had that. If you have
as bad as it used to be, but it's still there.
Yeah. I know when I was doing recording at home, we had these, and it wasn't even like in the same room. It was just in the basement, but we had, the typical, I don't know what, it's not floodlights, the big tubes, the big white tubes.
Yeah, fluorescent
lights. And we had like 2 of those over a workbench. And if I turned those on, it would somehow
the ballast
make a weird buzz noise or whatever I was recording.
The electronics of the ballast in those is awful. It's why you should convert everything over to LED, LCD, LED. There we go, LED lights. Because the ballasts are terrible. If you've got any kind of fluorescent near you, and the bigger the fluorescence, that's what made them efficient, right? But the bigger the ballast, the more interference you're going to get. Those are interference monsters.
And Kim brings up a good point. Carrie, do you know if it was you or the speaker?
That's true. That's why you test your own first, right? Test your own setup. Just you by yourself, get a thing recording, and then start. You've said this a million times, Dave. Get things going, and then start eliminating things, or eliminate everything and add one thing at a time.
Yeah, that's where when I was using my old system, and if I was doing a Skype interview, I would always pan me hard left and them hard right, and it was even if it was in one file. But that way, if there was a weird buzzing noise, I could see who's causing that. And then you can separate it and try to kind of clean it up later. But the whole buzzing thing, it's always fun.
I haven't had a buzzing. No, I got to knock on wood or get a rabbit's foot or something. But I haven't had a sound problem like that in a long time. Mostly because once I get it working, I don't change it. Like I just leave it. Don't screw with it. Don't try and make it better. If it's working, don't mess with it.
And she says, though, now I have a Tascam recorder and didn't have any issues with that. Yeah, they're actually sitting side by side. So that's where you're like, something you want to do with that is make sure that, if you're talking to them, make sure if you can have them on a microphone pointing directly opposite of you instead of sitting side by side, because then you get into this weird phase thing. I've had people that they were same thing, live recording into a mixer, but they were sitting side by side. And if you listened in stereo, it was fine. They actually had them panned a little bit this way. But if you listened in mono, their voices completely went away because they were out of phase and they actually canceled each other out. It was like one was +1, one was -1, just to make it easy to understand. And it was weird because they were in like an amusement park. So you hear all this amusement parky stuff in the background and they're talking. I think it was a Disney show. And all of a sudden I'm listening to it and they're like, yeah, on our phone, it doesn't work. Well, on a phone, it's mono if you're listening through the speaker on a phone, and you did, and all of a sudden it was just like they just vanished. So if you're doing recording, make sure if you can that you and your guest are sitting face to face, not side by side, because that can cause.
When I do it at conferences, I do it at a table where we're kitty corner. So we have mics going at let's see, is that 90 degrees. That's the best I can do. We can't sit across from each other because we need to do. I need to get it on a camera and I don't want my back to the camera. But so we do 90 degrees and that works out pretty well. Don't have any intentions of getting 2 tracks out of that when you're in the same room. Like that's not going to work because you're going to get bleed over and the first track for the second. It's just not going to work. So if you're in the same room, chances of getting 2 clean tracks,
not happening.
Not going to happen.
When I had my little office above a deli and my wife and I were recording in there, and I was amazed because we both had ATR 2100s and we're like way apart from each other, but it was a small office. And I was amazed at, number one, she was a loud talker, but how much bleed we had. And I just went, all right, well, don't worry about it. It's as good as it's going to get. So, but, at any rate, we should probably start wrapping up.
Yeah, you got a busy day ahead of you. Don't
I got to go eat lunch and pack a backpack for Columbus, and then get ready for the School of Podcasting. So that'll be fun.
It's good to be busy. It's good to be a busy Dave Jackson.
My
mom would say it keeps you out of trouble.
It does. It's kind of almost. But
I got to go mow the lawn. Let's stretch this out for another half hour, 45 minutes. That's the next thing I have to mow. And I bought, and I really bought this too late, but I bought the bug stuff for the lawn, to kill the grubs. And
did you buy Roundup, by the way?
I did.
Oh, because I just heard on, I forget what podcast, that they have to pay somebody like $29 million because it caused cancer.
It did. Yeah, but it was a farmer and he was spraying it on stuff that, I don't think the one drinking it, mixing it into just drinks.
Roundup, man, it's
super good for
C.
Yeah. Super good for you. Yeah, no, that's kind of an edge case, but
vitamin R.
I bought the my lawn. I think we're gonna try and sell next spring. So I'm trying to get you can't fix the lawn in a weekend. So I'm trying to get out ahead of this thing, and so I bought the stuff to kill the grubs, and then next month I'll do the weed and feed, and I'm gonna start actually doing what you're supposed to be doing to your lawn all the time. I just mow, just see if I can get it looking really good for next spring. So off to the races today.
Awesome. We'll have fun with that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm looking forward to it. So I enjoy the yard work. I bought a chipper. I told you that, right, on the show.
Yeah.
Now everything looks like a limb. Just jamming my skis in there. So great. So great.
Do you need that lamp anymore?
I know. Hey, can we chip? Let's see. What can we chip in here? Start pulling down rafters.
That's really what happened to the Blue Yeti. You're like, I wonder what would happen if I threw a Blue Yeti into a chipper.
That's my next podcast. Will it chip?
That's hilarious.
It's going to be so great. All right, Dave. Have a good weekend.
Right. We'll see y'all later.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Take care.